the Chairman IASB, the Executive Director IFAC, and Mr. Zahir Iqbal Bhatti, Moderator, to please come up the stage.
Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. Right now, let's start the interaction between the presenters and the participants. We have got about 30 minutes, I think, to do so. So please keep your questions short and sweet, and please identify yourselves before you ask the question. To set the ball rolling, may I first of all request IFAC's ICAP's representative on the IFAC board, Mr. Asani Shah, to set the ball rolling. Would you like to say something, Asad? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Zahid Bhatti. I think I meet both Jim and Arnold very often in the board meetings, so I can always ask questions there. This was an opportunity for other fellow members to ask them questions. But as you said, just to set the ball rolling, I think the first question, perhaps Arnold, you said that you are interested in hearing what should be the future projects for the IAASB, and of course this is also important from the perspective of our professionals, our members. I think you were not there in Geneva, Jim was there. This corporate governance conference which we had on October 12th in Geneva, IFAC and UNTAD joint conference. Obviously this was the topic was corporate governance, linking corporate governance with sustainability and strategy. And a frequent issue in the presentations was, and obviously Professor King, or Judge King, Marvin King, who also came to Pakistan when we developed this code of corporate governance, he was very passionate about this concept of integrated reporting. Both corporate governance reports integrated with sustainability, as Jim talked about. But the question that arises is that obviously this kind of reporting will be very useful for the stakeholders and for the shareholders and investors if there is some kind of assurance on the integrated reporting. At the moment, I don't think we have any standard on even corporate governance disclosures which are there in the annual reports. So are you considering some project? Because I think there would be, and probably there is already some demand for some kind of assurance by auditors on corporate governance disclosures, sustainability disclosures, and this concept of integrated reporting. And of course, together with that, one other thing that I would like to raise, which is very relevant from Pakistani perspective, is this issue of assurance on audit of internal control on financial reporting. Because, most of us here who audit banks, I think Council may have already talked to you that the central bank here has made it a requirement that there should be an audit of internal control on financial reporting. And obviously, for us, the standard setter is IAASB, because we don't set auditing standards. We just adopt your standards. But in this particular case, it seems that we'll have to adopt AS5 in the absence of any other standard. So are you considering at some point in time taking up the project of audit of internal control on financial reporting?
Right. Would you like to?
Thank you.
Would one of you like to do so, please?
Yeah, of course I would like to respond. The reason that on that slide on our future strategy, I already mentioned corporate governance and internal control. is because from the online survey that we did earlier in the year, we received a number of comments and suggestions to take on board these projects for potential assurance standards. Well, the board has sympathy to that, and as it was mentioned by quite a few, it came out as one of the more higher ranked projects as it seemed. One in that range is IOSCO, the International Organization of Securities Commissions, but there are more. So what we do now is, in the consultation paper, as it is currently there, the board will decide on that in December, so it's all subject to the discussions in the board. But the drafting is, should we have as a future project to evaluate whether there is a need for an assurance standard on these particular topics, and if that evaluation would result in a positive answer, then of course we should engage in such a project. But we first need to ask the question, because there might be others in the world say, well, yeah, that's interesting, but we have other priorities. So that's where we currently are. But we have therefore picked up the importance of the projects. And on disclosures more generally, I didn't talk much about that, but we have started a project on disclosures already. It's chaired by our Deputy Chair, Diana Hillier, because all over the place there is this question about more disclosures. Well, what disclosures? From whom should they come? Is there a role furthermore for the profession? In what areas? What kind of added value, auditing, assurance, agreed upon procedure, whatever. But it's early days, but we have picked up the importance of the question there again. Okay?
Right. Next, please, Zulfikar.
From video Pakistan. Recently, you will be aware that the European Commission released a green paper on audit policy lessons from the crisis and focusing on the role of the auditor. As a the standard setter for the profession, how do you see the role of the profession changing in the next 5 to 10 years, and how, in terms of the projects in place, do you feel that the role of the auditor is meant to change in terms of the standard setting process?
Well, let me start to say that that's a difficult question, which is always a compliment to the question asked. Jim may have some comments as well. What we see all over the world is this, on one hand, asking for more from auditors, which has to do with the relevance that I talked about. So at least what the profession has to do, and well, the standard setting boards, etc., is to discuss that in all openness. And what I'm hearing and reading more and more, that there is also a willingness and an interest in the global profession to do more. And not so much, I would say, to change its role, because audit of financial statements will remain important, but to add to that. And that, of course, can be in many ways. The typical example here of assisting more and assuring more towards projects as stimulated by US aid or the government is just one example. It might well be in more expanded reporting, but then also I have to say the caveat that this might take years before there is a bit of a consensus in terms of revised standards. But there is some urgency there. One clear example is, I mentioned the PCAOB in the US. They are also working on this audit report, and they have, in the last meeting, mentioned, the other week I was there, that they hope to have some kind of a publication in mid next year or so. Well, a publication still is not a standard, but it's just an illustration of how seriously these points are taken. So it will, as I said, not change but expand, is my personal understanding, but it will take also a lot of further discussion. Jim, anything there? Okay.
Please.
I am Abbas of Abbas & Company, Chartered Accountants. My question is to regarding this.
Can you stay a bit more close to the microphone, please?
Sorry. Your slide on this